GRC, it's like a whole world of ambiguous
Yeah.
things. And, I feel it's one of those underappreciated fields because at the end of the day, people oversimplify it and say, like, hey, you just got us a checkbox, right? In the GRC world, we've had very limited or no sort of remediation capabilities, right? Because remediation can be very technical and also very broad. For an AppSec team to remediate, it's very similar for all of the bugs you'll have, right, in the code. But for GRC, one side you may have an infra problem, one side you may have a data problem, one side you may have an email security problem.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of season 2 of the GRC Engineering Podcast. I am super excited about the guest I have with me today, Shruti Gupta. She's someone who has a lot of experience in security, a lot of experience in GRC across a very varied kind of set of companies. So she's been a CISO for Microsoft Identity. She also worked at Brex. She was managing security at Instacart. She was, I think, the founding security engineer at Airbnb. And I think you also worked at OpenDNS at Zynga. So you worked across kind of the SaaS world, technology sector in security. So I think you're a very good guest because you have a breadth of experience, and also now you have like kind of a major focus on GRC, which we'll get into a bit later. So was my presentation good? Anything you want to add around like your career and your experience?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited. I have always watched the podcast myself, and all of my friends were like, you need to really convince Ayoub to get you on the podcast. So I'm really glad you reached out and really happy to be here. As you mentioned, in my career, I started my early career with starting security programs at OpenDNS, which got acquired by Cisco, and then started the security program at Airbnb. I was CISO at Instacart, Brex, and then Microsoft Identity. I was also leading AI security efforts at Microsoft, which is where I learned a lot about AI and how AI can totally transform the manual work that we do in cybersecurity and GRC. So really happy to share my learnings today.
Absolutely. I'm super glad, especially because we haven't spoken about AI in the podcast yet, which, it's like the elephant in the room, like massive elephant. I think it's like this topic that is like on everybody's mind. But I think in the context of GRC, I don't think it's been picked up as much, just because I think like areas around SOC, and pen testing, some of these areas, I think there was seen as like a bit of low-hanging fruits. We only spoke about questionnaire automation, which is a bit sad. But I think some other areas were seen as like more like ripe for that kind of AI automation. But like I think you're a perfect guest to dive a bit deeper into like how AI looks in the context of GRC. So in terms of the first question I have for you is a question I ask all my guests. I want to learn more about your journey with GRC. So like what was your experience across your career with GRC? And especially focusing on like some of the limits you've seen, especially working at so many different companies, like some of the stuff that you were banging your head and like, why are we doing this like that?
Yeah, I think that, GRC is a very vast topic, right? As GRC professionals, we are tasked with a lot of width. We have to pretty much touch all sorts of controls, and it's quite challenging to technically understand so much breadth. On one side, you have controls related to code security. One side, you may have, controls related to, email security. One side, you may have physical security, then you have governance. There's just a lot of breadth to cover, and it's quite a lot of challenge to be able to have the depth of understanding as well as the breadth. And then a lot of it is very time sensitive, and also there is an auditor auditing you, right? Unlike in security where it's best effort and you only get uncovered when you get breached or you're presenting your metrics, it's kind of hard to know whether you did something right or wrong unless in edge cases. But in the GRC domain, I feel like it's a very business enabling function, and you're also under a lot of pressure, a lot of spotlight to do things quarterly, annually, and cover so much breadth and depth. And if you don't do it well, your company and business can really get penalized if you're not able to pass an audit. And it's also like a clean representation, right? You have to share the audit report, you have to share the findings with the board, the public, your customers. So I felt like that sort of pressure uh, challenge was really exciting, but also at the same time it is a lot of work. And I felt GRC is something where even if you're doing a SOC 2 or a SOX or PCI or any of these, even though it may be the same certification, but the way you reach these fulfill the requirements is very different from product to product, company to company. And then that again means that, it's just a lot of manual work, right? Traditional tooling, deterministic tooling has not been very good at automating the decision making or the complex things that us humans do. Most tools just help you operationalize the GRC parts. So that makes it even more challenging, like how in security engineering we have tools that can help find bugs in your codes, right? In the GRC domain, I feel everything has been manual, whether it's been creating policies, assessing evidences, finding discrepancies, writing these executive summaries for the board. And that was really challenging.
Yeah, I really like your take. I think what you said about tooling, I think is very good, because when I think about GRC tools, I think about like glorified databases. I think the main use case of GRC tools is like a repository of data.
Yeah.
And I think, like as you said, all the verticals within security, like they get a lot of insights out of their tools. They're able to get like, when you think about like cloud security posture management or some of these tools, like even some of the SIEM, like you get a lot of insight because they can correlate data, they can work to get like something that is actionable for you, and they do the compute of that for you, and you just get like something actionable that can like potentially meaningfully reduce like your risk posture. And I think that's where like GRC tools, they cannot fall short of that. And as you said, I think a lot of the work ends up on the hands of like the analyst or whatever to kind of do that. And they might get the data maybe out of the tool into a spreadsheet to compute it, to do like pivot tables or VLOOKUPs, which like is even more ironic. So I think it's a limit that also, like as you said, like it's very cyclical, but at the same time I think it creates a willingness to like mostly keep the lights on, right? Because you have to like stay alive up until the next cycle.
Yeah.
And you have to get to the next cycle with like no qualifications, no deficiencies, no exceptions. So there's this incentive to not go too far, because if the scope is too big, you might find some stuff. So there's like a lot of incentives that are sometimes completely opposite to the incentives of the other teams, right?
Yeah.
Like SecOps, they don't want to have like massive amounts of the infrastructure like not monitored. But in GRC, maybe in compliance, it's a bit easier then, because you have less alerting and less potential things that could go wrong.
Yeah, definitely.
So I kind of like your take on this. So, of course, this is going to be focused on AI. So we just spoke about like some of the tooling issues GRC professionals had. As like a primer, what would you say? So, of course, like there's a lot of FUD around AI, right? Would you say that if I'm a GRC professional, let's say I work in compliance for like a SaaS vendor, um, would you say like my initial reaction, let's say, to some of these tools is like fear? I'm like, these tools, they might be coming for my job. Okay. Like maybe if they're too good, then some of the actions I'm working on right now, like they might be taken off me. And then like, what's my value add to the company? Maybe they use it as like a way to cut costs. Would you say like using AI as like someone that works in GRC, like is the first thing that should come to mind fear, or is it like a different emotion that should think about?
So I personally feel the kind of work that you can truly automate with AI is not something that is fun work that you would want to do anyways. Like, would you really want to read thousands of pages of documentation, search across them, map them? Would you really want to spend time formatting, drafting things? I feel like it's the same argument that could have been had when we were moving to a more, cloud environment or having more software, right? It's at least like up until now, I haven't really felt that it uh, was taking my job away. I, in fact, felt it was enabling me to have more impact. And at the end of the day, what are the things you care for as a professional? One, you want to do interesting, meaningful work. You don't want to do the same repetitive, boring back of office work. That's not really fun, and that's not how you grow in your career, right? As you become more senior, you automatically want to give the repetitive work to somebody else, who's more new on the team so that you can focus on the more strategic, and that's what AI truly helps you do. Now, additionally, I feel that, in many ways, even our customers use AI as a training tool. These compliance is huge, right? You can
Yeah.
have a variety of regulations, and it's kind of hard to keep up with all domains. Some of them can be really technical as well. So I feel a lot of times AI has been really good at like pair programming, almost jamming with you, so that you can learn from AI as well. And overall, like the speed, the efficiencies that it brings, I feel is greatly appreciated. And all of my previous companies, we were always under fire. There was never a time where we were like, okay, now we are chilling for the next 2 months. We have a rest period. We don't have enough work. It's always like we're full with work over our head. And especially when you add it up with a lot of these things that you could easily automate and
Yeah.
focus on the more strategic. For example, would you rather work with your management team, your cross-functional teams, to enable them to actually, meaningfully improve the posture versus number crunching, document crunching, writing documentation, right? You can easily let the AI do all of these repetitive tasks and have more time and energy to focus on things that you can uniquely add value to.
Yeah, no, that I like that. I think it's as you said, I think it's sometimes like we once you kind of like get over the curtain of like just like this is scary, etc. And you think about it, you think about like how you spend your day, your 8 hours, what do you actually do, and like the percentage of that day that is focused on like getting value to your stakeholders and to the company. Sometimes like it's not 8 hours for sure. It's probably a lot less. And on that front, like I think something that is a bit more challenging for GRC compared to other security verticals is like most of the other security teams, they have at least bare bones ability to script,
Yeah.
so they can get themselves away from some of the menial tasks because they can automate, because mostly they speak with code. So if it's machine readable, they can find a way to like get that task like greatly reduced in terms of time spent. And like we were speaking about like reading through documentation, like if you build something in Python and stuff, you can just like get like docs automatically built for like any scripts you've done. Like it's not as easy if you just pick up like SOC 2 or like the last ISO standard and like build me a set of ISMS policies for it. It wouldn't be as easy. And I think like also something that is often said around like losing your job or losing like meaningful parts of your job. I think like when you think about it, like automation is a central part of like software engineering. And you never heard like a software engineer say like, I've automated this task, I've gained time. I'm like, maybe now they're firing me because like, they don't need me anymore. I think it's like a tool in the toolbox. And I think then you can get the actual like cognitively complex tasks to be actually completed, because if you're just too busy work, you never have time to do that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm telling you that a lot of our customers, whenever they start, their managers start talking about using Zania, a lot of them have actually come up to me and asked the same question, like, hey, am I going to lose my job because now we're going to be using Zania? But, inevitably, everyone finds so much value because one, you're doing less repetitive work. Second, the quality and consistency becomes much higher. Imagine doing 1,000 repetitive operations, always asking vendors, hey, are you doing access, are you doing access controls? Do you have backup policies, etc., etc.? And you're just like repeatedly doing it over and over again for all your vendors. For your data science team, you're always asking the same questions. You're always checking for evidences and determining, hey, like, is MFA turned on? Like, all of this again and again, doing the same thing. It's really not helping you grow as a professional. You're just doing the same work over and over again. And it's also error prone, right? It's slow, it's error prone, it's not fun work. You're, filled with time sensitive work, over capacity at times. Especially recently, all the companies have started focusing on being very efficient, so headcount is tight. So you can easily have AI do a lot of these things and help you, give you a helping hand, and really boost productivity.
Yeah, that's a good way to frame it. I think it looks, especially as you said, the context of efficiency, like all companies are kind of be looking after the pennies and stuff, just because the era of 2021, 2022, like free money for everyone is kind of behind us. So I think that's where like also AI makes a like is a very good kind of bridge, just because you can get like kind of help that feels almost like human, just because you used to do that, you as like a practitioner, but at the same time like you kind of pawn off mostly things that are like low leverage, so you can focus on those bigger, like more like interesting activities. Because I think in GRC, also the history of GRC, right, with IT auditing, with Enron, with like SOX and all this, I think because it came a lot from Big Four and steam through the industry, because like all ex-auditors ended up in industry and working from these companies building those GRC programs. I think we were very protective of the way we perform some of these things, and I think it also like impacts how the other security teams see us, so like infosec, appsec, etc. I think it starts to have this like kind of shift where it is like security and then there's GRC.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think AI can help like get Jussie back, like with the team, just because they're doing so much busy work. So like you're the only team that uses like spreadsheets every single day, right? We don't care about spreadsheets. We think in code, we think in like logs, etc. So I think it also started to drift away. And I think like AI, because you can focus a bit more on those like important tasks, and actually collaborate with those teams on like big ticket items. I don't know, getting everyone on MFA or like some of this stuff. I think then you can see your impact more clearly, and other teams, they're more likely to see you as like a peer and like work together.
Yeah, definitely, Ayub. You bring up a great point of being technology first. GRC work has been so complex and niche that it's kind of hard to automate the actual, assessment piece and the decision making piece, right? And as you said, most of the tools really help you manage evidences better. But GRC can often be considered as like a less technical
Yeah.
team, or, not automating enough, or like those are the boring folks. So I think leveraging AI and engineering it in the GRC field really changes that status quo. Like, it's not just a buzzword that helps you insert an AI. I truly have seen how massively it can transform and automate a lot of these complex GRC operations that otherwise could not be automated.
Yeah, no, that's definitely something that can bridge that gap, especially like technical gap that we see in GRC in terms of usage. So of course there's like products out there. Of course, you're a CEO of Zania AI, but there's a lot of companies that now use AI as part of their offering as well. If I'm like head of GRC, I want to get started on like using AI to make the GRC work more efficient. And let's think about it in more of like vendor agnostic way. What would be like the first steps I should take towards like that new path?
So I feel that you can use AI in many different interesting ways that can be useful. And depending on how much of your work you want to automate or what type of things you want to automate, the methodology would be different. If your team has an internal copilot already, like a Chat GPT Enterprise, or the Microsoft suite of copilots or any others, then I feel that's incredibly useful for me as a translator. just creating executive reports, sanity checking
Mm,
stuff, doing analysis. Like I feel that type of high level work, but please, take permission from your security team to make sure that the tool you use has enough guardrails
yeah,
because you might be sharing sensitive information, and obviously do not use a public model
yeah.
without asking your security team to share any company specific confidential information. But overall, I felt like those tools really help me reduce the amount of cognitive overload and spell check, executive summary creation, writing emails to like, hey, nice way to say, can you please fix all of this? Hey, can you please give me more money? Nice way to say all of these things. And doing analysis, right? Giving some data and easily doing analysis. Like that's, I feel, been really, really helpful. Now, that is like general, for any industry, not specific to GRC. Within GRC, like if you look at like the core GRC operations, I do feel that even those can be automated to quite a lot of extent, depending on the tool that you use, how you want to use it. I mean, there's two ways to do it, right? One, you have a GRC engineering team and an engineer, an ML, AI, ML engineer who can really help you create custom automations, which may be hard. I mean, maybe for certain top companies, they have the budget, but otherwise, it may be quite hard to attract AI talent within a GRC team or have your general teams give you AI resources. But in those cases, you can write scripts, create extensions of internal tooling, things like gathering evidences, assessing them in some way, or, like creating certain escalations, like all of those manual tasks that you might be doing, you can automate with scripts, and you can use LLMs. You can train them on your company specific context if you wanted to make them even more targeted, but that would be like the more advanced use cases if you have the resources. For the general GRC folks, the easiest way to get started would be to use a tool that has AI, right? And everything has to have like a means to an end. So why do you want to use AI? What are the biggest pain points? Usually, I've seen a lot of the big pain points come from when you're doing actually, when you're actually assessing policies or evidences, it can be a lot of work. Regulations can have hundreds or thousands of requirements, and you need to assess, hundreds or thousands of evidences, policies. You need to keep interviewing people, crunch a lot of documentation, see the evidence that you've collected is sufficient. So all of that can be, automated with AI. You can and depending on the tool you use, some tool may do it to a certain extent, like traditional tools have been good at creating some integrations, for example, with your cloud providers, and then checking for specific settings, which may work to a certain extent. But then the remaining half of it, which comes from internal tools or checks. For example, I'm using a jump host to reach production. That is not an integration I could have. Or, hey, I want to do a test of design for which I need to create a policy that satisfies these five controls. And then I need to check whether my policies are designed correctly. I need to find discrepancies between my policies and what is actually being met. All of these things can also be automated with AI. So you can check with the tool that you use if they have any of these. Recently, I've also started seeing a lot of questionnaire automation, which is like a great use case. Chat GPT and all of these tools, they are a question answering tool, right?
Mm,
A Q&A is the most basic functionality that an LLM can be used for. So, filling in questionnaires is like an easy automation criteria. Also doing TPRM, managing your vendors, it's checking for a certain number of controls in the packet that a customer gives you. Again, like easy um, uh, to do. So normally what I've seen is that there's two kinds of vendors. The first one are tools that were built on deterministic technology, and that works mostly for small, medium-sized businesses. As you become a unicorn or a multi-unicorn, those checklists of do compliance through a certain playbook fashion in a predefined way um, stops working, right? Because as you become like a mid-market or an enterprise, you don't have that simplistic tech stack or, a simplistic organization. So in those cases, whenever those vendors enrich their product with AI, it's still useful, but it's kind of limited, right? Because you're using it as an extension of very old school technology. For example, you could use it to improve a control language. You could do these small like icing on the cake, but the cake
Yeah.
itself is kind of old. So there's limited things that you could benefit with in terms of automation. And then there's like the newer AI native set of tools. I am biased obviously because I've created an AI native tool, but I feel a few years from now AI native tools will be able to drastically change the status quo as compared to traditional technology. Because for an AI native tool, these models can be trained on a process just like humans are, right? Like how Ayub is trained on how to do a GRC work, that's how models are trained. So you're not actually trained on if else statements or deterministic ways of, hey, if you see, an open S3 bucket, then fail this control, right? That's oversimplifying how an enterprise would meet a certain control. And these AI native tools can actually be trained on the methodology, and then they can make dynamic decisions just like humans do, or at least it feels like, it's human-like smart decision making. So I feel these types of tools have a lot more capabilities in automating things end to end. They can do a test of design, a test of implementation. They can collect samples. They can write policies, write executive summaries in a fully, end to end automated fashion to a
Mm.
certain extent. Whereas the traditional tools, which most people would have, that's what the tools have. They are really good at collecting evidences, kind of sorting them out, tagging various people, and then they have a sprinkle of AI, which is, again, helpful as compared to no AI. But there's like certain limitations for what you can do. I would say personally, I have benefited a lot in my life using AI. The quality of my work has increased a lot. I'm able to do a lot more. I've learned so many cool things. And if you want to learn AI, I think AI is the best teacher of AI. So you can you can go to Chat GPT and you can just ask questions and it'll tell you how to learn AI. Also, YouTube is a good basic resource. You can see videos on retrieval augmented generation. You can see videos on how AI agents work. You can learn how to write good prompts, and all of these things are gonna be, really helpful in improving your day-to-day work.
Yeah, I think it's good, like, to get more educated on this for two reasons. Like, potentially in the future, most frameworks will have like an AI security section. So we'll
Yeah.
probably test for AI related controls. So you need to know about them ahead of time. But also, I think it demystifies it a bit. I think understanding like how LLMs work, so RAG, as you said, and how like like how you generate prompts and all this. I think once you understand it, what it is under the hood, I think you can like kind of assign it to different buckets instead of
Yeah.
having this like, it's almost like a kind of a cloud, like a dark cloud. You don't really know what's behind it. There's like this magic, and then it comes up and like robots rule the world or whatever. So I think it's good to have that like education, and I think there's enough free resources out there to like kind of get that knowledge. And as you said, you could probably ask the AI to get you that info. But I think it's a great way. Like one use case I like to use AI for is like, let's say I come towards like a new technology I don't know about. Maybe I'm working on like, I don't know, caching. I fall upon like Redis, let's say. I can ask the AI to kind of give me like, explain it to me like I'm five, and like similar kind of technologies that do this, like do me a diagram that showcases how caching is working in the cloud. And I think like in a quick amount of time you get like the right information, most likely like a relevant one that was also like kind of sourced from across the web. And also you can kind of get the right level of depth. So maybe you can say like, I'll ask this as a compliance person. Now I'm asking this as like an infrastructure engineer, and then we can get also different perspectives on the same topic, which is I think very helpful, because before, like, you would just do it yourself, but
Yeah.
it's tough to get the right level. So you might find a handbook on the topic, but it might be super, super dry. And then you might
Mm.
find like something too high level, so you don't get the depth you need to like test the control, for instance.
Yeah, definitely. You bring up a great point. I always use AI as a tutor or to
Yeah,
gather
exactly.
information. Hey, how does this control work? Tell me, is this sufficient? Like, also a lot of compliance is very subjective or very,
Yeah,
you can maneuver your way around it if you know how you can, have something in scope or out of scope or what's enough. And I
yeah,
think for folks early on in their career, it can be really challenging to know what is sufficient because a
yeah,
lot of these controls can be very open-ended, right? There are certain regulations that are very prescriptive, like they must tell you encrypt data using AES 256. But then
yeah,
there's certain where it's like confidentiality is protected. Now, whatever you can interpret
yeah,
how that means. So finding a concrete set of what is enough and having a sense of security, I feel is really helpful. Otherwise, a lot of times I feel I've been in audits where I didn't know if something was enough. And either I hire a very expensive consultant for 100 to 100K to tell me, hey, is this enough? But otherwise it just felt like unknown unknowns. I don't know what's enough. So I felt like it was really helpful for me to have an AI tool kind of pair pair with me as a learning exercise.
yeah, yeah. I think for that is great, and I think something where like more kind of off the shelf um tools for AI are not that good for GRC is because GRC there's a lot of closed source data. So like the way assessments are performed, that's where like I think something that is trained on like how to perform the task by people that perform the task, I think is valuable, because if you think about it, like each of the big four, they have their own way of testing, own way of sampling. When you think about like TPRM, depending on like where they worked before and how they build their programs, maybe they come from financial services or whatever, the way they perform like vendor assessments can be very different. And I think very like a very limited amount of that data can be pulled by like open models to like give you relevant information when you prompt them, because a lot of that data is like kind of held by these companies and by practitioners, and I don't think GRC were as good at like blogging, sharing things outside, kind of showcasing that. So I think that's where like some a tool where like practitioners can like perform the task and you get it performed by someone who did it potentially thousands and thousands of times. I think it brings something that also like answers this, because I remember starting in the industry, of course back then there was no like LLMs, but like it was very tough for me to like understand how to like build an ISMS, because the data that was available in the wild, like it was like a lot of it was like behind paywalls, and a lot of it was just like, kind of tribal knowledge you needed to know because you did it before or because you worked in a consulting company.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of scary. I mean, I felt, I've worked in all domains of cybersecurity, privacy, and GRC, and I feel GRC is the most sort of, open-ended and hardest.
Yeah,
And, although people might say, like a cloud security or like an incident response or application security is very technical or hard. I honestly felt those areas are very focused. You are only focused on solving a particular problem and it's very contained. So while initially it may take a little bit of time for you to learn the technicalities, but after that it's pretty easy. You have the same set of five problems, all cloud native companies solve it the same way, pretty much. So it's much easier. Whereas in GRC, it's like a whole world of ambiguous
yeah,
things. And, I feel it's one of those underappreciated fields because at the end of the day, people oversimplify it and say like, hey, you just got us a checkbox, right? We got the checkbox last year and this year. And, well, like all of the work was done by this team, that team. Like you guys were
yeah.
just telling them what to do. But I think in reality, I personally felt it was one of the hardest parts of cybersecurity.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Of course, the podcast is also here for that, to kind of give a different perspective on GRC. But that's interesting you say that, because that's true that, like, compared to other teams, there's a lot of different touch points. Like, we work with a lot of different stakeholders, and also, like, we have, it's very open ended, but also like the frameworks that give you like kind of a boundaries. But like, if you think about ISO, like especially being European, like we use ISO a lot. Like, they might ask you like how to, you need to integrate security into project management. But like, of course, it was written at some point. But like, when you think about that, you think about waterfall, right? You think about gates, etc. And I think that's where it can get very complex. Like, how can you solve that problem if you don't have projects? You only have pull requests or merge requests, right? The way you frame your work is in sprints, and there's no like boundaries where the project starts with a kickoff meeting and stuff. It's like maybe stand-ups and like more Scrum or Kanban related kind of like ceremonies and stuff. And I think that's where there's almost like kind of debating included, where you have to almost convince your auditor potentially of like, I actually satisfy the control objective, quote unquote. Like, I satisfy what you need, even though, like, if you just read it out loud, I'm not doing what exactly is written down. And I think that's some of the ambiguity that people don't always see in GRC. And it can request a lot of work, a lot of evidence, a lot of like convincing to like avoid potentially getting like a qualification or something, because you still satisfy the control. It's just, it's very tough to explain sometimes because the context is very different to what like the auditor might be used to.
Yeah, definitely. And the volume of data, right? I mean, you have like thousands of systems in a
Yeah.
company. You have to make sure every system is done the same way. All background verifications must be done the same way. It's like really can, the auditor can pick any person or any system to audit, and it's kind of a very hard challenge.
Yeah, no, that's true. In terms of, so I wanted to ask you, in your experience around AI and GRC, what is one like kind of work stream or use case that before starting in there you didn't think like would be prone to like being automated using AI, and like since you started working in it, you're like, oh, that's so funny, like it actually works so well for this specific problem I didn't know could work in there. Like, do you have one kind of funnier example about this?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that really was, a delightful moment for me was when I saw that we could automate creating a common controls framework with AI. I know that in the companies I have worked at, we've literally had, at times even dozens of subsidiaries or products that needed to get compliant. And each one of them has like at least 5 to 15 compliance certifications that we needed to get for them. And it was really, a lot of work to be like, hey, for 10 of my product verticals, I have to get 15 certifications. So every quarter, I'm, assessing against them. And I'm doing all of this work 10 into 15 times, right? It's just a lot of volume. And the way enterprises solve it is by creating like a unified or a common controls framework where you say something like, hey, I'm Airbnb, instead of doing this 150 times a year, and 150 times hundreds or thousands of controls, right? So imagine how big of a nightmare this is. I just create a common framework where I say, okay, this is like the Airbnb or the Microsoft identity framework, where I downstream then map it out to all the 10, 15 frameworks. And thus I'm trying to only make sure that this one parent framework is compliant with, and the other ones will take care of itself. So it dramatically saves like 10, 20x of your time, because you're trying to just get compliant with one. And this effort has been like an insane amount of effort to just build this. Takes many years, and then you have to keep it up to date. It's just quite challenging. And while theoretically it seemed like, yeah, that's a way to automate GRC, practically to create that framework and to keep it up to date such that your company has its own bespoke framework was really really challenging and time consuming and practically like impossible, even for like the biggest companies. And what I realized was that you can actually have generative AI automate that as well, and I felt that, and always keep it up to date. And that was really really powerful. I felt like, now teams don't have to do so much work, they can drastically cut down their work by creating one, GitLab framework or one Airbnb framework, and thus all of their downstream compliances will automatically be met.
Yeah, that's a good use case. I know in companies, bigger companies, from my experience, like we can have like almost teams working on CCF and like getting this like always up to date, because you always add new frameworks, and then it might
Yeah,
break some of the current like mappings you have, and there's always edge cases where like it maps
exactly.
maybe to 2 in ISO, and like especially when you think like 15, 20, 25, 30 different set of requirements, it could be very, very time intensive. And I think especially like, I know it's like a very manual for, and often like every year you might have like external consultants come in and do like this kind of mapping exercise for you, but then maybe like the control set you have changed because like some of the infrastructure change or like the environment change, and maybe you added new frameworks you have to be mapped on, and like maybe you do the work again. And I think it's like keeping it up to date, I think is the toughest. I think it's once it's up and running, I think it requires a lot of maintenance.
Yeah,
So
exactly. And then regulations change, the controls
yeah.
might get slightly changed. So it's really hard to practically, keep it. But AI can literally, like, you can really automate it with AI.
Hey, that's a use case I'm all for sure. Spending way too much time doing some of that work. So yeah, that's definitely like some interesting use cases. One of the thing that for me is almost like kind of meme, but I know is like important, is like question automation. I know it's like a low hanging fruit. It's been around for quite some time. Some of them before were not as good, like with like more of natural language processing and stuff. Like there was a lot of
Yeah.
kind of hallucination and issues with like understanding context. There was like they were understanding the syntax, but like the semantics of like what do you mean? It was a bit challenging. One thing I wanted to tell you is like, of course, it's a broken process, like the questionnaire process. But do you think with AI, it's almost like an indirect way to keep questionnaires coming, just because it's going to be so much easier to complete that there's no incentive to move away from them?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and people will just now, if it becomes easier, then it just promotes the whole thing. But
Yeah,
I feel practically it's kind of hard to give up on questionnaires. Probably, it's one of those necessary evils. Uh, I
yeah,
mean, we have trust centers and people try to give the trust center link and it works for certain set of buyers, but then practically it is hard. And also like questionnaires is not just used for security, it's used in a lot of other domains as well.
yeah,
Like a lot of teams would put in like IT, legal, privacy, non-technology related questionnaires as well. And I've seen that by automation, people actually are able to unify these various teams. So instead of coordinating with, hey, IT team, this is your stuff, put it in here. Hey, are you done with this? Hey, security. Hey, privacy, all of these can also be unified, because then if you have a good data set, it can just keep filling in the questionnaires and also identify discrepancies that you might have.
yeah. No, yeah, that's true. That's that. In this sense, I think it's good use case, but it would be great if AI could help TPRM enough so we can kick the questioners out. If if TPRM could get good enough, then it could pull that data automatically and get like the sense of how like a company is performing based on like whatever controls they want to like kind of make openly available, and can just like almost like call the API and get that data in real time. I think in this, like, they would like literally solve almost like TPRM, just because I think the questionnaire problem is a TPRM problem, right? It's like the way we assess vendors that end up like us sending dozens of questionnaires. And I think, like as you said, I think they're common in lots of different areas. But I think in the context of GRC, the issue is we do use it to assess how secure a vendor is, even though they're mostly non-reliable, just because you can say whatever you want, even though it might be liable for it. Like, at the beginning, like if something actually happens, it's going to be a lot more complex than just say, you said yes here and it was no, right? And I think the other thing is around like you you ask for like maybe what's in the SIG, or like, you know, what some of these like big kind of template questionnaires, but also like you don't focus on what's actually important for you, right? If you knew your risk posture, maybe there's only like 10 or 15 things you're actually interested on, but you won't
Yeah.
still ask everything just in case, and that's what kind of dilutes the problem sometimes. I think like that's where also I think AI can help, because it can probably get you like the data you actually care about, and you can
Yeah.
probably focus on that instead of like asking about everything. But then in reality, you won't manually go into every SIG and look through 400 answers and check whatever, when they said yes or when they said no, when they said NA. So
Definitely. And how do you envision that, Ayub? Like, do you envision the data to be pulled from like a trust center, or maybe your repository where you're storing all the policies, procedures, and evidences?
I think, of course, there's like some legal implications, but I think at some point we might have like almost a redacted set of controls that we can like, for which the health can be automatically pulled. So like it's a trust center, but you could have like, instead of having like a declarative, like I have a policy, I have this, I do this, you could just have like pulling data back from your cloud environment that would say like, yes, for all my S3 buckets right now, like encryption is available and it's like state of the art. It's, let's say, AES 256. And then I could just like by API call pull that data from your trust center and have like my own dashboard with all my vendors, and I can
Makes
see like whichever vendors like controls are operating effectively. um I see a massive issue with that, because you know, in the legal sense, when you sign off on something, you say that all controls should be operating at all times, but at
Yeah.
some point sometimes like they might not work, but because you might be alerted on it, it might lead to like massive fines or legal liabilities or even breach of contracts. So that's,
Yeah.
this aspect is still a bit complex to sift through.
You're, only thinking of the positives, but sometimes things can get messed up and uh,
Yeah, you might have like, you know, some good stuff out of it, but then an army of lawyers come to you to your headquarters and like, you know, request hundreds of millions. It might be tough. So, you know,
that's
we love our legal teams.
too much transparency.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where we need to find balance. But I think that's where potentially the industry might move forward to, just because like in other areas, like share the open sharing of information, especially when you think about vulnerabilities and incidents, I think it kind of augments the collective understanding of like risks, and like you can kind of piggyback on whatever the states are doing, and like big companies, they kind of share CVEs and all this. And I think something like this in GRC, like a common way for us to like share information about controls in a more open way, could work. But it's a bit woo-woo, right? It's just still it's still pretty far from it, but potentially could look like a good future state for all of us.
Definitely. I can see how you're so passionate about third-party risk management.
Yeah, passionate is not the right word. Sometimes it's more frustrated, but yeah, it's definitely like, I think for me, like one of the big problems in GRC, but also big opportunities. I think if
Mhm.
we can solve it, even if partially, I think we can really like get everyone more secure, but also like cut a lot of the busy work that for me like does not bring like meaningful value to both like the vendor and also like the company itself.
Makes sense.
In terms of, so now kind of getting closer to the end of the podcast, I wanted you to kind of speak a bit more about your company, just because you're focused specifically on like the topic of AI and GRC, and you've shared a lot of interesting insights like for people that want to get started on it, like some of the use cases, like what you're trying to accomplish. And I think it's like you're still very like unique in this sense, especially the way you think about the company, and some of the achievements in terms of like the things you're able to do by AI agents is pretty interesting. So could you kind of touch a couple of words on this?
Yeah, definitely. So, um, I personally have helped build a lot of generational, unique companies, right? I worked at Airbnb, Brex, Instacart, Microsoft as well, became very innovative after, I started working there and leading a lot of projects. But essentially, what I felt in my experience was the whole way of how we do cybersecurity in GRC, just like fundamentally is so unique and challenging because it's It varies from company to company, use case to use case, application to application. And thus far, you couldn't even automate it as much, right? You could only automate parts of it, wherein you collect evidence better, or you are more efficient with how you communicate with other teams, just like the program management or the process
Mhm.
efficiencies that it brings. But what I realized while leading AI efforts in my time at Microsoft is that it can entirely change. So what I did was I, thought of it from first principles, like what would a more seamless, automated GRC look like? What are the things that we do? And we built an AI native tool where we use our own custom models. We train them on how assessments are done, how these various GRC processes are done, be it filling questionnaires, assessing third party risk, for auditors as well. How would they audit against a specific regulation? How would you assess gaps against a regulation? How would you do risk assessments? How would you create a common controls framework? And essentially, we have our AI agents that can do all of these operations in minutes. And it's quite simple. We try to, really make it easy for GRC professionals to automate their manual work. So you just come into the tool, you drag and drop the needed policies or interview notes, evidences, etc. And then you can automate all of these processes, and it really takes it from just being a glorified database to actually helping you automate the thinking or the decision making as well, um, and really help you do things that would otherwise take many people many months to do it in minutes, right? For example, if you wanted to assess gaps against the EU AI Act, right? Simply just drag and drop your policies and evidence packet. This is something that you already collect to give it to your auditors, right? Or if you use one of the other tools, you can get a download from there and just put it in the tool. And within a few minutes, it'll tell you, like, hey, out of these hundreds of requirements, you're meeting 85 of them. And this is what you exactly need to do. And traditional tooling has kind of helped you do it to a certain extent, like the deterministic parts, which can be coded. For example, certain cloud configurations were done, but that's usually only like 30 to 50% of the actual work, right? There's a lot of emphasis in GRC on policies, procedures, evidences, like screenshots of things, right? And finding discrepancies. So our tool is able to help all of those. And what was fascinating to me is that, AI agents can be trained very specifically on how you do an assessment. So similar to how Airbnb would do it differently than an Instacart, than a Microsoft, than a GitLab. AI agents can be personalized a lot.
Mhm.
And while they can make all of these decisions, they can also explain to you how they are making these decisions. And that is really powerful because it can be used as a training tool as well as making sure that however your AI agent is making decisions is auditable and you can easily check whether it's following the right process. And to me, I feel like it cuts out a lot of this repetitive, busy work that, anyways, teams don't have the time and resources to do.
And in terms of like the next step, so what are like the new frontier? What are the new kind of workflows you're thinking about of automating? Like what are some of the stuff maybe is not as like feasible as of now, but will be in the future and you're actively working on? Like we want to think like, robots kind of stuff like the, the future.
Yeah, definitely. So currently, our AI agents are able to do assessments really, really well. So you could assess a third party for risk. You could assess against a framework and say, hey, what are the gaps against HIPAA or SOC 2 or whatever. You could also assess against a NIST and, identify gaps in meeting a certain framework, identifying the risk or the maturity level. You could create a common controls framework, you could fill a questionnaire. I think the future would be to go a little broader. For example, how you mentioned, right? Instead of assessing a vendor based on the questionnaire is submitted, maybe you could pull it from other places like their controls that they might already have. So, collecting evidence or this information which is left of an assessment is something that we'll be working on in the future. So, more easier ways to be able to gather this information for your AI agent to be more deeply integrated into the environment and more autonomous. That is one thing. And then remediation would be the other thing, where how in security tooling you could automatically create a PR, you could automatically have these tools automate remediation to a certain extent. In the GRC world, we've had very limited or no sort of remediation capabilities, right? Because remediation can be very technical and also very broad. For an AppSec team to remediate, it's very similar for all of the bugs you'll have, right, in the code. But for GRC, one side you may have an infra problem, one side you may have a data problem, one side you may have an email security problem, one side you may have like some finance control that's not being met.
Yeah.
So remediation is quite challenging. But AI agents are very smart. The way AI agents work is similar to humans. They have tools in their toolbox. So
Mm.
similar to how you and I will have access to Google, internal documentation, the tools that we use, Slack for communication, etc., etc. The way AI agents work is that they have, an inference engine, or think about a brain of their own, where they are trained on how to do certain operations, but they are also very smart. So if you give them access to tools such as Google, or a search engine, or a internal repository of, hey, this is my Confluence page and this is how the process is done, they are smart enough to be given a problem and see if they are already aware of how to solve this particular problem. If not, then they can use the tools available to them and think dynamically. Be like, hey, I've been tasked to send an email to Ayoub. And I'm going to request them to change MFA. So they can easily follow playbooks that they have been given access to. You just simply connect them to Confluence, or you give them access to Google search if you want this particular agent to be able to Google stuff and learn things.
Mm.
And then they are pretty self-sufficient. They could go, they could pick up information, they could make a plan, like how we think
Yeah.
step by step. They would create a step by step plan, and they would say, hey, okay, I need to send Ayub an email to remind him to set up MFA. So let me think about what is the process that GitLab follows to be able to do that. So it'll go to Confluence. If you have that playbook, it'll say, okay, like this is the system where he can reset it. This is the directions. He needs to create a ticket with the IT team. He needs to use Jira, whatever the process is. So the first step will be to understand the process. The second step will be to search for Ayub and Slack. So it'll go to the Slack tool in the directory. It would identify your handle. Then the third step would be for it to create a message. So it'll create a nice message for you. And if the playbook had a certain way to draft a message, it would follow that. Otherwise, it would follow its own intuition to draft a message. Then it would go again to another tool like Slack or email, create a message for you, tag another person if it was needed. And then it would just follow along, the process playbook. So it's really fascinating, and it almost feels like human how these AI agents work.
Yeah.
But it's really, really useful, I feel, in automating an end-to-end workflow and not just answering a question. Most tools like ChatGPT, etc., are really useful. They help you give answers to things that you may not have answers to, or things that you may need to be polished, and that is still valuable. But I feel like, especially for a security GRC team, workflow automation is really what is like the next level of automation, right? Because otherwise, without that, you'll still be doing the coordination, you'll still have answers, but then like to use the answers and actually complete a process end to end is really hard and really time consuming. So you can automate not just like individual blocks of work or get answers that equip you to do something, but an AI agent is really advanced, and you can actually make it like the GitLab AI agent, the GitLab GRC agent, or the Airbnb AI agent. And then it is kind of like following the same process as you and I would. And also it'll be very consistent, right? You
Mhm.
and I could make a mistake, but for an AI agent, it's always trained to follow a certain process. And now AI agents, there's a lot of buzz around AI agents, but I feel a very powerful thing an AI agent does, and that is like absolutely needed in GRC security, is that our decision making is very dynamic, right? No two things that we do are going to be the same. There's always going to be differences. Like one time, for example, I'd be talking to the data team, another time the infra team, another time I'd be looking at code, another time I'd be looking at policies, another time I might be drafting a exec report, might be training, people on my team. And all of these are very different from one another. And traditional technology can't automate the difference, right? You
Yeah.
need to have a pre-programmed set of things that it would do, and it has to be so deterministic that, even the parameter cannot change. But with AI agent, that's not the case. They can make dynamic decisions on the fly, and that's the powerful piece, right? The whole challenge I feel in security is that the whole reason we've relied on so much manual human work is that only humans were able to do the dynamic,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
The traditional tools did the static. Even if they were automating the same thing over and over again. um, but with AI agents, you can really go, the next mile, and that's what we are excited about at Zania, and that's what we've been working on.
Yeah, no, that's really like the difference maker, I think, with AI, because I think we've been focused on automating anything related to collecting data. So
Yeah.
of course, evidence gathering from like the automation platform, etc. So everything up until like the assessment or up until like actually performing the task. And I think that's where we have all the data to perform the task, but this task is still low leverage, still low value add, and I still have to perform it manually. And I think that's where like you can get to a level where you're very good at macros, very good at pivot tables, whatever, but you still have to do all that work in Excel spreadsheets. And I think that's where like I think AI brings a complete different level of automation, especially like AI agents, is where we can automate like the actual doing of the work instead of like all the pre-work. So that's super interesting. Like definitely, I think it's something that is like a new domain for GRC. I think it was not in our radar maybe 3-4 years ago. Even like I started in the industry 5 years ago, like no one was speaking about this. So I think it's like super exciting, and I see that like, of course, it takes so much time because even like just the automation of like data gathering is still very tough to pick up. Like lots of companies are still like not on that boat. So the AI agent part, I think, is still for like what we would call early adopters, or companies that are really believing in like they already know about the rest of the automation process, but they kind of really see the value of like automating the actual like activities themselves. And I think that's like where you could probably make a difference in your GRC program, because I think if you kind of focus on these items early on, like you could potentially kind of free up a lot of the analyst time or the team's time to actually have an impact that is like felt across the security org, potentially across the industry with like all the other stakeholders. So that was a very insightful conversations.
Yeah, I know it's really fascinating. I'm really passionate about learning about AI agents, implementing them, helping our customers with it. And it's really fascinating. I mean, it sounds very sci-fi, but when you understand how it works, it's very basic, like it's very like it makes so much sense how an AI agent would just, it's just at the end of the day code that calls another
Yeah,
code, and
yeah.
you just have all of these tools be integrated, and then it just makes a plan and executes on it. And I feel it's really early days, but also really, really powerful.
I agree, and I'm pretty confident at some point we'll all have to use it anyway. I just think like there's the opportunity when your program is still like kind of getting into that next level. I think that's like you need to think about these things. I think there's like all those different layers of automation and potential like time savers and stuff. And I think like kind of AI agents is like the top, like it's like the highest level of automation you can get. But I think people need to like have a plan. um, that's what we often speak about in the GRC Engineering Podcast. I think you need to have a plan on how to automate those parts of the program, because it relates to so many other things. Because when you think about consistency of data, like
Yeah.
not less error prone, it also means like more accurate metrics, more accurate reporting, right? Because there's all those potential problems that also impact like the end result that you showcase to leadership, etc. So I think having a plan on this is definitely like you need to have it. Then budget or like willingness or maybe maturity will like kind of dictate how far you go. But I think you need to understand like the different stages.
Definitely.
That was very good. I think we had like great conversation, lots of interesting insights. I think you really did like a good kind of primer around like AI and GRC. I think we dig like into some of the more specific use cases. That was also super interesting. And then also like speaking specifically about your company, but also like kind of because your company is just focused on like AI GRC agents and I think it's like interesting to also understand like how far we can take this, how far like you can have AI kind of help with some of those GRC activities. And I think it was both super interesting, but also like kind of inspiring in a way, just because we're thinking of like, AI agents taking over GRC. So yeah, I wanted to thank you for your time and for all the insights, and hopefully, all the listeners will have lots of insights to sift through. And if they want to learn more about what you're doing, where should they head?
Yeah, they can reach us at zania.ai, or just email me at shruti@zania.ai, or just message me on LinkedIn. If you have
Perfect,
any
perfect,
ideas, suggestions on things that we should automate, then message me.
perfect. Sounds good. Yeah, really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks a lot for your time, and yeah, take care.
It was a pleasure, Ayu. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.